By the time you get finished with this episode, you are going to have more information about January 6th and the Jack Smith indictment than just about anybody. I'm a federal criminal defense attorney. I've tried more cases than just about anybody you'll hear of and obtained more acquittals in these types of areas. And in analyzing this indictment, I've got to tell you, it's absolutely weak sauce. We are in an era right now. Federal prosecutors are taking vague statutes and they're levying them against people for political gain. Donald Trump indicted for political gain. We're going to show that to you and we'll break it down.
I feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. I'm back.
You made it, Sean. And let me tell you, running a whole episode without you was a very, very difficult thing to do.
You did a great job. And here's my honest assessment and opinion of what you did. Because I know people are going to watch this episode and automatically, before they even start going through the content, they're going to say gaslighting and they're going to say January 6th and the big bad orange man, did all of these horrible things. But here's the fact. We talk about this before we get started on every show. You and I get into some debates as we did on the episode last week where, you kind of said, I fundamentally disagree with you. And then we kind of went through and talked about it. Look, our position is the facts, okay? Mm-hmm. And when people in Congress who have a legal, ethical, and moral obligation to provide the general public with the whole picture, and instead they cut out key aspects of what individuals are actually saying, whether you like the guy, you love the guy, or you hate the guy, he's entitled to a fair hearing. Yep. And that never happened in these impeachment, proceedings. This never happened on this January 6th committee. And the question that I have for you, right, before we get started today, because I want to ask you a very important question.
Oh.
Well, I have two questions for you.
Oh.
So let me ask the first one.
Question.
Yeah.
It's going to be $50 per question.
Yeah. $50 per
and
question.
What is your final question?
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to pause, don't answer. And then I'm going to ask you the second question and then you can answer. And maybe you answer the second question first. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So here's the first question. And I want us to play this clip because you played it in the overview. And the overview that you provided was simply the facts. There was no extended commentary. There were no extended opinions.
You're talking about my homie P-Dog in the front of the car while she's being taped from the back, right?
That's right. So I want to play Nancy Pelosi taking full responsibility for not having the Capitol secured on January 6th when she was offered every opportunity to have the National Guard.
Let me just tell you, the reason why I call her P-Dog is because it's absolutely gangster. Knowing she has full responsibility for some act and then standing up and launching a full investigation, months of committee hearings against him. I mean, that's absolutely gangster. Wonderful job, Nancy. Now it's bankrupting the American people, but wonderful job. Let's see what she has to say.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
We just heard what P-Dog had to say.
Yeah.
So here are my two questions. Mm-hmm. First question, why is it that this evidence that has been available since the beginning, since the Capitol riots, okay? And I think calling it a riot is what it is. I think that's the right term. The January 6th riots.
Some people rioted.
Some people did riot. Some people were there peacefully protesting. Irrespective, it got out of hand. There's no two ways to put it. Okay. So, first question. Why is it that Donald Trump was indicted but Nancy Pelosi was not. Okay? I'm going to pause. And here's my second question.
Yep.
For this episode today, what direction do you want to go?
Only one direction, Sean. Off the roof. Let's go. All the way. All the way.
Let's do it. All right. Question number one. Let me have your thoughts.
Well, I think I can answer both in one fell swoop. Why did Donald Trump get indicted? Well, obviously it's political reasons, and that's not just opinion. I mean, that's literally fact. So go back to the last episode. You see that Nancy Pelosi stands up this entire committee. It wasn't a bipartisan committee. It was Nancy Pelosi's committee. It was her pet committee. Why did she stand up this committee? Because we later learned that she had fully confessed to her malfeasance as being responsible for this. And in order to avoid her own impeachment or responsibility, she felt that she could kill like 17 birds with one stone. I won't list all 17, but the first couple are Donald Trump may not be able to be reelected again because he's now the godfather of January 6th. Perhaps you can ramp up your political clout for future races and regain your position as Speaker of the House and maintain it. You can wield a pretty heavy political weapon against a lot of Republicans who choose to support Donald Trump. And all the while you can claim with this like exasperated type of, aura about you that you are such a victim from January 6th and we need to have a bunch of moment of silences. I don't know if we got to playing this clip, but hopefully Mario can pick it up. There's one part of this that was absolutely the most, and I want to swear right now, but I won't, the most egregious thing ever. There was an officer who I believe died of a heart attack or something like that down in the basement. Absolutely tragic. But then there were congressmen who were never checked in making these statements who claimed repeatedly that an officer was slain.
In the process, 138 Capitol and D.C. police officers were injured. A Capitol police officer was bludgeoned to death.
Yeah, he was bludgeoned to death. That's actually the term that they use, bludgeoned to death. And here's the thing about this officer who died, which is terrible. The guy had an underlying medical condition. The guy did not die at the scene. He died later of complications from whatever his underlying heart disease issues were. So this guy, and when this Democrat congressperson was making these egregious statements, the Republicans on the other side literally called him out. And his response when he got caught lying was, well, I would hope that the distinguished gentleman who's an attorney could understand.
An initial thought, and I know that Mr. Roy, you too are an attorney. Mr. Bishop speaks often about how brilliant of an attorney he is.
No, dude, you just lied. You just lied.
He got caught. He tried to wiggle his way out of it. But that's the thing. So Nancy Pelosi is head of this entire herd. She's created a mass hysteria inside of her party, which means she gets to consolidate her power. She has other people believing that officers were slain in this and that there was so much evil. And what she's done is she's taken the actions of a few people, 100, maybe 200 or so actual rioters. Maybe there were more. I don't know the actual number, but it wasn't 10,000. It wasn't 20,000. But she's taken the actions of those few people. She's put them over the top of the entire Republican Party, including Donald Trump. And she has said, you all are insurrectionists and you all should not have any power whatsoever. And I should have all of the power. And then she gets bipartisan Huckabee to cross the aisle, so to speak, and champion this effort with her. But here's the problem, Sean. And some of this stuff we're going to get into when we do the episode on the impeachment and actually dive deep into it. Fabricated evidence was actually allowed in front of that panel and that committee. Their report is absolute garbage because it completely omitted some of the mitigating factors. There is absolutely no reason why you would play a video of Donald Trump saying, let's fight like hell, without playing the next part that I talked about in the last episode and showed twice during the last episode, without playing that next part that specifically relates those statements to fighting like hell inside of the political process, something that is absolutely protected speech. But here's the other thing.
By primarying those individuals, that's the key. and they cut it out because it didn't play well for them.
Yeah, they cut it out because it completely gutted their entire statement. Like, shame on anybody who votes to impeach Donald Trump as a result of that hearing, when this was all predicated on these sort of statements. Now, a couple of facts, and I didn't learn this until I spoke to Ryan Zink, who I hope to have on the show. He's going to be calling us from prison, and hopefully we'll be able to get it in on the show, because he had to report. But he was a fascinating young man to talk to. We're going to have him on the show. And I wanted to make sure that you were there, because I thought that it would be very, very important for you to be able to meet him. Ryan told me that, and this is kind of well known, I just didn't even think about it this way. Most of the people that started doing the heave-ho at the Capitol and breaking through those fences, most of them were doing that before Donald Trump had finished speaking. And Donald Trump was speaking about a mile away, which means that this sort of parade happened to the Capitol building while he was speaking, and nobody was listening to him. It's not like they had him like live on a radio. I mean, maybe somebody had like CNN on their phone or something like that and could see it, but they were already headed to the Capitol building. Some of the break-ins happened before the majority of the crowd ever got to a position where they could see that people were actually breaking in the Capitol. Certainly the barriers around the Capitol grounds, they were already breached to the extent that many people who walked up to the steps of the Capitol had no idea that they were even trespassing. I spoke to a bunch of people who had no idea that they'd ever crossed any sort of red line, because the cops had moved out of the way. They weren't pushed out of the way. They'd moved out of the way. The barriers were like placed, in different areas. And when you're in a sea of thousands of people, this doesn't really happen, where you kind of look around at these displaced barriers and think, oh, this must be some sort of Berlin Wall that I cannot cross. That's not exactly what it looked like to them. So bottom line, to fully answer your question, Sean, Donald Trump gets indicted because they know that this case is not going to go to trial. They know that this case is going to bounce back and forth between the Supreme Court and the trial court. But one thing that they know for sure is that they can use it to muddy up Donald Trump significantly. They can use it to try to prevent him from running for office. Of course, Trump steered into it like he normally does. And they can also use it to say that this Supreme Court that Donald Trump has put people on is somehow illegitimate because they keep voting for him. Crazy thing is, the immunity case was so heavily criticized, which we will get to later in this episode. But the crazy thing is that presidents have effectively been granted immunity for the entirety of the existence of our country. Nobody ever had to ask for it, because we don't go around indicting former presidents. We just don't do it. We didn't indict Obama when he decided to slay with a drone a human citizen. We didn't indict George Bush for failing to find the WMD. We didn't indict Nixon. He was pardoned, but we didn't have to indict Nixon because his successor pardoned him because it's the best thing for the country. Now, the Nixon thing, political witch hunt, would love to dive into that with you, Sean. Absolute BS. Nixon was going to do things similar to Trump and change the country, and they decided to take him out. But that's not surprising that the Supreme Court would give something to somebody that has been offered and not asked for 275 years.
Yeah.
Or how many are we at, Sean? What are we at?
I think you're right.
We got a lot. This is a lot of years.
It's a lot of years.
Yeah.
It's a lot of years. But I think
older than Betty White. I mean,
listen, this is an issue that has to be explored, because I think this could be a case, a study case, if you will, for future law classes on how to conduct your investigation as an attorney, how, what to look at, what to look for, these kind of things. But, again, I wish Antonin Scalia were still around today, because I think him opining on what has transpired, it would be prophetic, his assessments. And I think nobody could frame an argument the way that Scalia could frame an argument. And his majority opinions, his dissenting opinions, that they were masterpieces.
Well, and he's not here because of some strange occurrences in a hunting lodge, I believe, which is
something like that.
Something I'd like to look into. Sean, let me break down
this. Yeah,
let me break down why this is going to be so important for everybody who's watching today, because I know we owed you an overview and we didn't give you one out there, but I want you to see exactly why we're going into this. So obviously, there's an election coming up, And this is going to air slightly before that election, but what we're talking about is going to have implications on both sides, and we're going to cover both sides. So if the election has already happened and you're watching this, you're still going to get a lot of information about what happens if Kamala wins and what happens if Donald Trump wins. We're going to look all the way into that to give you what will happen with Donald Trump's criminal case. But first, we're going to go into the criminal case and exactly why it was brought. We've covered a bit of that. Then we're going to talk about two very important Supreme Court cases that you all should know about. The first is the Fisher case, and the second is the Donald Trump immunity case. Both of those have huge implications for this because they need to be analyzed by Judge Chutkan, and they will make revisits back up to the Supreme Court. And then we're going to talk about some of the nitty-gritty in this historic indictment against Donald Trump. I was on BBC the day this indictment came down, and it was unique for me. It was interesting to see, while you're on air and then you're waiting to go back on the air. I was like waiting all day and then like making hits on the air throughout the day. You get to hear the British reaction, and there was a somber tone behind it. It was like they were watching, their big brother like turn into Venezuela, and that was a bit of tragedy. Nobody was talking about Donald Trump. Like everybody says, you go around the world and everybody is so shocked at how terrible our country is. That's actually not true at all. The Australians love Donald Trump. I mean, like for some reason, Australian media is just like.
I love Sky News. I love Sky News. I love first thing in the morning before I dive into all the serious work that I have to do. I love the episodes that I get to watch on YouTube of lefties losing it. Pariah, I think is her name. She's outstanding. And you're right. I agree with you. The Australian media loves Donald Trump. It's incredible.
They think that he's pragmatic, but they're literally laughing at the other side. They're laughing at the fact that you all can't figure out which bathroom you're supposed to go into. They're laughing at the fact that you all can't figure out what gender you're supposed to be, and that's difficult. They're laughing at the fact that you want to put a candidate into office and you don't have the respect to run a primary. They're pretty much convinced that this will be the last election in United States history. I mean, everybody is looking at us not because they're shocked at Donald Trump, but they're looking at us because of how outrageous the other side is getting. Let me get back to the timeline here and what we'll talk about. So by the time you get finished with this episode, you are going to have more information about January 6th and the Jack Smith indictment than just about anybody. I'm a federal criminal defense attorney. I've tried more cases than just about anybody you'll hear of and obtained more acquittals in these types of areas. And in analyzing this indictment, I've got to tell you, it's absolutely weak sauce. In this era where we just had the Abercrombie and Fitch guy indicted, we've got Diddy indicted, Weinstein's indictment, his charges have literally been overturned. We are in an era right now where federal prosecutors, whether you are red or blue, it doesn't matter. This is something that is incredibly important. Federal prosecutors are taking vague statutes and they're levying them against people for political gain. An 80-year-old man who was the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch was indicted for something that happened in 2008. Why? For political gain. Donald Trump indicted for political gain. We're going to show that to you and we'll break it down.
And the last thing that I'll say to lead right into this, anyone who believes that the Biden-Harris administration, or now the Harris-Biden administration, whatever you want to refer to it as, if you don't believe that they have weaponized the justice system against their political opponent, one only has to look at what Joe Biden said the other day, which is, we have to lock him up. And then he caught himself and he said, well, we have to lock him up politically. Well, listen, Ron, I want you to get into this thing, but I think this is so important. As a former federal prosecutor and as a criminal defense attorney, if somebody says, like, let's just not say somebody, the sitting president of the United States, whether he's demented or not, makes a statement of, we have to lock up my political opponent, and then corrects himself and says, we have to lock him up politically. What is the difference between lock him up and lock him up politically? I don't see any difference in that whatsoever.
Well,
but I'm not an attorney.
I do have to point out the fact that literally a campaign slogan for Donald Trump was "lock her up."
Yeah, but Hillary
So
Clinton needed to be locked up
it's
because she
speech.
was a war criminal.
I'm going to tell you that we can all put on our Brandenburg shirts here and be
Yeah.
protected under the First Amendment. Joe can wear one. Hillary can wear one. Donald Trump can wear one. And we're all, and the reason why I say Brandenburg shirts, because Brandenburg is the United States Supreme Court case that we talk about a lot here, which defines the difference between criminal speech and non-criminal speech. And Joe Biden standing up and saying that I'm answering this from a legal perspective.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Him saying that is certainly protected speech. He's allowed to say it. It's crazy that Trump literally got indicted for saying things that were much less severe. But that just answers the criminal side. Let me just put on my moral hat, my like good ideas hat. Is it a good idea for somebody who is saying that Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump wants to weaponize the DOJ and Donald Trump wants to win the election just to settle old scores and engage in vendetta? Is it a good idea for Joe Biden to then say, lock him up? No, that's two-faced. That everybody sees through that. That's just absolutely ridiculous.
All right. That's what I was looking for. Listen, I'm not an attorney, but as a pragmatist, I'm going to use that word forever.
A seasoned pragmatist. That's our party, the Pragmatist Party.
I'm going to use that today in arbitration while I'm being questioned. And I'm going to say, folks, I'm a pragmatist. I look for common sense, real world solutions. And that's what we're talking. So anyways, my point is, as an independent, objective third party, looking at it where it has been denied again and again and again by this administration that they have not weaponized the justice systems against their political opponent, which we all know they have, because we have never seen in the history of this country the persecution of a former president and the current nominee for the Republican Party or for any party ever be prosecuted and persecuted in the way that Donald Trump has been.
Yeah. The reason why they're fighting so hard, Sean, a few things. When Donald Trump gets back into the office, if he's elected president, the information that he is going to uncover about the sharing between Fani Willis and Jack Smith about the organization. I mean, if he wanted to use the same theories as Jack Smith, he has got election interference, RICO charges against just about everybody involved. And you know what I hope he does? I hope he has a press conference and stands up in front of the American people. And he said, I am ending the investigation against me, and I am ending and stopping any investigation against anybody else. We are going to heal from that. And I'm going to offer some limited pardons to January 6th folks where I feel like it was nonviolent, or I'll set up a committee and that was unjust. And then this is done. Yeah. That's what needs to happen. That's what he can do. If he oversteers, we're just going to keep teeter-tottering towards our own destruction. And
I see a difference in Trump this time around, though, Ron. And,
I could see him doing that. Yeah,
I see a difference in his demeanor this time. You know, when I voted for him, and I'm proud to say I voted for him in 2016 because, I mean, look at how great the economy was. Obama's an absolute idiot to say Trump did nothing and this was my economy. It just shows you how little Obama knows about how economics works. But regardless, Trump in 2016 until 2020 did an incredible job with an America First policy, kept this country safe, kept the rest of the world in check. We had no wars. We were pulling out of Afghanistan with pride, with our heads held high. We were doing it in the right way instead of leaving $80 million worth of our stuff behind and being a complete disaster. In 2020, I had my concerns again. I wanted to see a statesman. Joe Biden was not what this country needed, but there was so many people that were tired of Donald Trump's mouth, his public persona, the way that he came across. Looking at him now through this election cycle, and after he's gone through everything that he's gone through with Fani Willis, with Letitia James, with Jack Smith, with the Harris-Biden administration, him getting shot in the face, having a second assassination attempt and now possibly a third assassination attempt that was planned against him. I think this guy has eaten some humble pie to a degree. I think he's still brash he's a narcissist, but I see a difference in Donald Trump. I see him connecting more with the American people. I see him being humorous more. I see him being lighthearted. I love the fact that he did the Joe Rogan podcast on Friday, October 25th. And Rogan, has the ability to expose everything and everyone. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to see that. But these political persecutions and this Jack Smith, this guy is an evil, evil individual. Fannie Willis has suffered significant losses as a prosecutor. She suffered another significant loss this week here in the state of Georgia where I live. It's just not looking good for her and her political career or her legal career. But again, enough about this. I just wanted to add some political, some political commentary to some of this stuff, because what you're about to dive into and break down for all of our viewers and listeners is so critically important. And I know you're going to get into Justice Roberts and the 5 things that he looked at as well in determining presidential immunity. So I'm done interrupting you on the political commentary side. Let's get after this thing.
Oh, you're good. You're good, Sean. Okay, so I think the best place to start is January 6th. That was the end of the last episode where we talked a little bit about the impeachment hearings as well and some of the evidence there. But January 6th, 2021, we've got Trump supporters and others, some people say storming the Capitol, right, after a Save America rally while Trump was speaking, okay? Obviously, Congress was halted that day. And as a result of that, the vote certification couldn't happen until Congress met again. I think that was like maybe late at night or early in the morning, they were able to continue it. And then January 7th, they finally certified the vote count. Now, everybody says that there was a tremendous amount of pressure on Mike Pence that day from the Trump administration and some of his counsel. And Jack Smith later cites to that as a big part of his indictment, that there was so much pressure on Mike Pence to do something. The strange thing about this is we've seen this happen in the Diddy indictment. We saw this happen in the most recent Abercrombie and Fitch indictment. And here's this nebulous concept of pressure on somebody to do something that they don't do. That's interesting. That's a really interesting theory. Jack Smith has decided to indict somebody for putting pressure on Mike Pence, who didn't actually do the thing that they think is criminal. I don't think that thing is criminal, but in the Diddy case, pressure on people for career advancement to engage in certain activities that I won't discuss. The Abercrombie and Fitch, pressure on people related to career advancement. What we see is this trend of the government, this very paternalistic government saying that it is unlawful to pressure people. Well, that's never been unlawful in the United States. Conspiracies are conspiracies. 2 people agree to do something, and both of them agree that it's criminal. Or you can be a principal and force somebody to do something, in which case they might have the defense of duress available to them. So a big part of Jack Smith's case starts on January 6th, where Donald Trump has purportedly pressured people into certifying a slate of false electors. Let's talk about this slate of false electors idea. You've all heard the phone call, probably, of Donald Trump calling, was it the governor of Georgia at the time, Sean?
Yeah, it was Kemp.
Yeah. So he's calling the governor of Georgia. I think there were some aides on the phone as well. And he's saying things like, we need to find the votes. We need to find the votes. Jack Smith heavily relies on that, as well as calls and contact to other people, in addition to a purported conspiracy with John Eastman. His counsel at the time used to be, I believe, a constitutional law professor, and his counsel at the time, to do what's called raising a slate of fake electors. Now, here's how the fake electors thing works. I've tried to explain this on the news many times, but they only give me a minute or two, and it's very complicated to go through. This is one of the reasons, Sean, why I wanted to have this show with you, because I often don't have enough time to say what actually needs to be said. And here's sort of the behind the scenes look of my talking points when I'm on the news. At the time the false electors thing was floating around, I did a bunch of research on whether or not this has ever happened before. And it turns out that no less than Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, raised a slate of fake electors in the state of Hawaii in the event that there was a contested election and he was declared the winner. They would have electors who would be able to go. And here's what happens with the Electoral College. The Electoral College is not a college of people that are in existence right now. It's not like 275 or whatever individuals that are just waiting to find out which color they're going to turn. That's not how it works. When your party wins in your state, your party nominates electors that then have the ability to go cast a vote consistent with the number of electoral votes that are granted in that particular state. And so you go and you cast those votes. And then what happens is Congress certifies those electoral votes, and that's when we certify the presidency. If there's a tie, then it goes to Congress and they take other action. We don't need to go into that. So what happens if there's a vote count and everybody thinks the Democrats are going to win, but there's litigation or a recount and a Republican wins? Well, you need to get ready with your electors. Why? Because Inauguration Day is coming. It's going to happen on January 6th, Sean, no matter what happens, right? And honestly, I have not seen anybody talk about the electors saga like this before. I've been waiting for somebody to cover it, and I can't find it. I searched high and low. January 6th is coming, and the electoral votes are going to be cast before then, and that date is also solidified. Sure, there might be some wiggle room there, but January 6th, this needs to happen. If this doesn't happen on January 6th or spill over into January 7th, the nation is going to be in trouble, and everything is just, kind of off. So what Donald Trump was trying to do was make sure that in those states that were heavily contested related to litigation, in Pennsylvania, he filed a lawsuit that won. We spoke about that on the last episode, not the last episode, but the one before it. In many other states, they'd modified their mail-in ballot rules, and he had very, very legitimate claims as to how those mail-in ballot rules were not properly modified by the people there. Many of those cases, those 62 cases that they say Donald Trump falsely filed and lost, many of those cases weren't filed by him, but many of those cases just dropped dead at January 6th because this was going on in Congress. These cases hadn't been fully litigated and dismissed by courts. The Supreme Court cases that were filed by Donald Trump to contest some of the lower court decisions, those were never actually heard. And the emergency petitions were denied as moot, meaning on January 6th, Donald Trump still had pending Supreme Court petitions before the Supreme Court. Why is that important? Because there's about to be Mike Pence standing up in front of the American people, leading a process that's going to certify an election as being a valid election in the United States. And if Pence does certify the election as a valid election, he is saying, I am the vice president of the United States. This is a valid election, and we are turning over this process. Well, what did Donald Trump want to do instead? Maybe he wanted to allow his litigation to fully proceed and not get cut off just because of January 6th. Maybe he wanted to have a merits hearing or a trial related to some of the shenanigans that happened in certain states. Pennsylvania was squirrely. What happened in Cobo was squirrely. What happened in Maricopa County and is about to happen again in Maricopa County is squirrely. There are questions that remain unanswered because judges didn't allow them to be answered and nobody got into discovery. So Jack Smith files an indictment after a congressional committee stood up and said that there was good cause to indict so that he could have some cover. And he said that this was an obstruction of justice because justice means Mike Pence standing up before justice has been done and certifying an election. Apparently, asking for justice is obstructing justice. Sean?
And I don't understand that concept. I mean,
the Supreme Court does in the Fisher case.
Well, the Fisher case.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So in the Fisher case, I think, and I'll give my simple understanding of this case. First, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 back in June of this year. And I want to make sure I get this right, that the charge only applied when the defendant impaired the availability or integrity, meaning they attempted or successfully were able to achieve that of a physical document or object used in an official proceeding. Am I right on that?
You're right. So I wrote about this a lot in my last book, Unraveling Federal Criminal Investigations. I have a whole chapter on this case called Yates. This is a case where Sotomayor, she did the one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish thing, I think during oral argument, which got a laugh out of everybody. I think that Sonia, I think she's got a sense of humor. I'm looking forward to standing up in front of her someday and facing some questions, because despite where she is at on the bench, I feel like I can hear her and Scalia banter back and forth a little bit. I think that she's still one of the good ones. I know you're probably like roiling right now, Sean, at me saying Sotomayor is potentially a nice person.
I'm trying really hard not to roll my eyes, which is why I have my brim of my hat pulled down a little bit further. So as I give that occasional eye roll, You can't see it.
I want to go to Sonia's house for tea. I would enjoy that and have some nice discussion and see where she is on things. She's got a great legal mind, although we don't always see it in the writing.
Do you think she would serve crumpets with the tea?
I think her people probably would. Sure. I think if I asked for them, there are probably some spare ones hanging out. My grandmother served tea, and that was just a beautiful thing. That would bring me back to the old days. But let's
love tea.
Let's go to the Yates case. So I wrote about this heavily in my book. The Yates case this is where the federal government started to just get ridiculous with the statutes. I'm talking like Bam Margera ridiculous with the statutes. So there's this Sarbanes-Oxley Act that is passed after Enron. Some people watching this show may not have even been alive during the Enron scandal. But thankfully, I think I was still like in high school or something like that, just finishing out high school when all of that went down. And during Enron, one of the biggest companies in the United States was defrauding its shareholders to the tune of, I believe, billions by essentially cooking the books. And one thing that they did when they were about to get caught, Sean, they literally had Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm in Enron, literally had lines of dump trucks in New York outside of their businesses where boxes and boxes of documents were being thrown in there and shredded. And there was no law preventing it. There was no law preventing it. So when they finally got indicted, there was the Skilling case that came out of this, and then the Sarbanes-Oxley statute was passed. And in that statute, it contains a provision that says if you obstruct justice by altering or destroying or some open-ended version of that, I'm not going to read the full statute here, but if you obstruct justice by doing something like this with the document, then you can be indicted. But then there's this catch-all phrase. And this catch-all phrase is otherwise obstructing justice. And a lot of times Congress will do this. They'll create a statute that's very clear. They'll be like, listen, you can't jaywalk in Central Park between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m., and you can't otherwise engage in disorderly conduct in New York. You're like, wait a second. I thought this statute was about jaywalking in Central Park, and now this last little part makes it, unlawful for me to engage in disorderly conduct. So this was the difficult question for the Yates court. The Yates court was saying, well, wait a second. If the statute is limited to obstruction of justice and document destruction, how can we have this big overall provision down there at the end? And that's exactly what the court in Fisher said as well. So Jack Smith does the same thing the prosecutors did in the Yates case. Ironically, I have to describe this. The Yates prosecution was related to a fisherman. The fisherman went out to fish in Florida. He was caught by the Fish and Game people. They said, hey, head back into shore and check in with our boys over there. We know how many fish you have that are undersized. We'll give you your fine and you can go on your merry way. Well, he decides to throw a couple back and catch a couple and try to cover it up a little bit. And the prosecutors say a fish is a document, Sean. A fish is a document because it's evidence of the fraud. and they try to pin him on a 20-year offense for destruction of evidence. He's a fisherman. He threw a couple fish back. This is a bureaucratic fishing charge that is now turned into, 20 years in jail. It's the most insane thing. So I
don't understand how a fish is a document.
I don't know.
Well, listen, if a kid in school today could be a cat or an elephant, maybe a fish could be a document.
Well, and here's the thing. I believe that Sonia Sotomayor was in the minority, believing that a fish was in fact a document. I think that
then I want to have tea with Sonia.
They legislate. She agrees with legislating from the bench, and she thinks that it's fair to modify that statute to say document doesn't just mean tangible object. I can't remember the exact holding here, but listen, I'm a student of Yates. I've read this case. I know it. I believe in it. And then I see Jack Smith's indictment, and I'm screaming inside of my head because nobody understands what I'm saying. So I have to do it inside of my head, Sean. How can Jack Smith bring this? He must know Yates better than I do. What is he talking about? He knows that this is not a good legal theory. And not only does he charge people with obstructing justice for getting into Congress, even though they didn't destroy any tangible objects, but he charges 300 some people with this offense. 300 some people. Why did he do it? Well, I'll tell you why. You charge them with that massive offense. That's much bigger than trespassing. In some cases, including Ryan Zink's case, that was the most serious offense they were facing. That's big boy time in jail, right? So he charges them with that offense. They get plea deals that are shoved in front of them. I've heard this from multiple January 6th defendants. Plea deals shoved in front of them saying, we'll get rid of that charge and we'll let you plead to this if you say, Donald Trump made me do it. I'm so sorry. And probably some version of, I will vote for Kamala in the next election or something like that. And if you sign this deal, it'll be a great deal for you and you can move on with your life. Everybody was telling me discovery was withheld from them. A plea deal was put in front of them. We'll have Ryan tell you himself. A plea deal was put in front of them. And those people that refused to sign were thrown up against the wall with this sort of charge. Well, the Supreme Court had to step in and say no in the Fisher case. No, it is absolutely not true that you are obstructing an official proceeding when you engage in this sort of conduct. Thank God for Fisher, who decided to not sign that plea deal and go all the way, as well as his co-defendant and those other January 6th defendants, because this is how the law is made. It's made out of difficult circumstances. It's made because somebody thinks somebody did a bad thing and that person thinks maybe they didn't. And so we get the Supreme Court involved.
Let me ask you this, because I was thinking about this the other day. We often wonder why Jack Smith has done things in the manner to which he's done it. Do you think it's because he knows he's going in front of a judge that despises Donald Trump and who plays partisan politics? Think about this. Chutkan released additional documents, right? We're talking about this revised indictment, superseding indictment, or slopperseding indictment, whatever you want to refer to it as. Prior to an election, this is election interference at all counts. But do you think Smith is putting things into this because you're asking these questions because he knows that it doesn't really matter, because whatever he puts into it, Chutkan hates Trump as much as Jack Smith does, and he knows he can get away with putting any piece of crap in there that he wants. And he's revised his indictment now. He's given her a little bit more, and it doesn't seem like there's any pushback. Listen, we all know what's going to happen when it gets to the Supreme Court. This thing's going to be thrown out because this is ultimately going to the Supreme Court.
Well,
unless Trump.
Yeah, let me talk about those. Let me talk about those options because it's going to get a little bit more nuanced. When it comes to Judge Chutkan, I will say this. There's a long line of cases that allow her to do what she's doing. Bias or not, I'm not inside Judge Chutkan's head, and I won't get inside the head of a federal judge just because of my job and my duty to argue the law and accept the outcome of whatever judge I happen to be arguing to. I very much have to just move forward with that in mind. I don't have the luxury of standing at the courthouse steps saying that judge is a bad judge, because I should have had better legal arguments, right? And maybe I should be making those to the appellate court if we have a decision we don't like. So I will tell you this. I think that Judge Chutkan was supported by a long line of cases from both sides where prosecutors were allowed to blur the line between criminal conduct and not criminal conduct and politicize these types of issues. And so even if this wasn't Judge Chutkan, it was maybe Brett Kavanaugh sitting there, would he have had the ability to look into his toolkit and say, I've got a great ability to dismiss this case that's filed in front of me? I don't think so. I think that if this went in front of a different judge, listen, we saw how much Judge Cannon had to stretch to dismiss Donald Trump's argument under the appointment clause down there. I mean, I agree with the decision ultimately, but, you know, she definitely had the weight of the law up against her. I think she made the right decision, but she definitely wasn't well supported in the law because the law is not that dandy for criminal defendants these days. So that's my thing with Judge Chutkan. I think that, there's a ruling that's pending before her right now on Trump's immunity, and we can go through those factors as to whether or not he was engaged in official actions or unofficial actions. It's not true what Joe Biden said after the Supreme Court issued its opinion. It's not true that immunity opinion gives a president unfettered discretion to do whatever they want. That is absolutely not true. It's a false statement. This is still very confining for a president who acts. They have to be engaging in an official act. So Jack Smith filed a very long document saying Donald Trump is not engaged in an official act for any of this because he's running as a candidate. He made some great points. I was re-listening to this earlier today in preparation for the show, Sean. And one of Jack Smith's points that I think he made was fantastic. He said, Donald Trump, in contesting the election, he only contested his election. He only argued that his election was fraudulent. He only argued that he should be the benefit or get the benefit of some kind of recount. But he wasn't engaging as a president in the executive branch to ensure that elections are free and fair. And I was like, hey, Jack, that was a pretty good point right there, right? So you could argue that that's a candidate. Now, I fundamentally believe, and I think the Supreme Court will ultimately determine, that campaigning for a second term as a president is an official act. Because think about it this way. Sorry, Sean. If you don't get to campaign as a president, you can't be a president. It's a sort of precedent that needs to be set here that when you are campaigning, if you're following campaign laws related to this, and that is part of your campaign, then you should be given immunity for those sorts of actions, especially if you are the president.
So that's where I was going with this.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sean Weiss, for whatever reason, I become deranged and I decide that I want to run for president of the United States.
I'm going to release those photos pretty quickly to stop that campaign in its tracks. I've been holding on to those for a while.
You promised that as my my counsel and my friend, those were privileged. Okay.
Oh, you're going to raise privilege on this. Oh boy.
I am going to raise privilege. Okay. so I decide for whatever illogical reason, I want to run for president of the United States. And I am now a candidate, right? Let's say for however it happens, I become the Republican nominee for, the party. Okay. I engage in trying to get people to help me, whatever it is, right? The things that Trump's being accused of. In my mind, I don't know that I should or could get away with those things, right? I'm just thinking from a non-legal person's mind. But I think for me, when I look at this, the difference is Donald Trump is the sitting president of the United States at the time that this is going on. He is saying in the case of Governor Kemp, listen, we need to find the votes. I don't think anyone with half a brain is going to argue the fact that there were voting irregularities in 2020. I mean, Jesus, they were finding boxes of ballots in areas that were stuffed away somewhere
Well,
There,
yeah.
you see where I'm going? So
Yeah.
I think he was the sitting president of the United States, which again, in this situation, makes it an official act of the president.
Oh,
Am I wrong?
I agree with you. And in fact, it's probably better if I frame this. I should have set this up a little bit differently because we are a little further down the path without discussing something fundamental to this. First, when you're indicted, the thing that you're indicted for must be a crime. So there are criminal acts, obstruction of justice. I don't believe that this constitutes obstruction of justice. I believe that debating in the courts, debating on the stage, that making statements to other people, even if people might think that those are coercive, I don't think that those are obstructionist. I think that that is what a politician does. I think that those are the only tools in the toolkit of a politician. Calling somebody up and hammering on them for a while, getting your legal counsel to do whatever, bullying Pence a little bit. I don't care. Honestly, if Pence doesn't have enough backbone to get through a little bit of a rub from Donald Trump being pissed off that time is running out and he doesn't feel that the election was fair, none of that is criminal. So we have to look at the indictment and say, okay, here's what the criminal charges are. Mostly the obstruction of official proceeding charge is going to be the biggest charge. And then they have conspiracy on top of that as well. So first, the question is that illegal? And the answer is no. But here's what Trump is trying to do with immunity. What Trump is arguing is that all of the acts that they put in the indictment that he engaged in, and I know you recognize this, Sean, but a lot of other people may not yet, the list of acts, the conspiring, so-called, with Eastman, the bullying of Pence, the calling out to Kemp and trying to get him to find the votes, and all of the other things, the slate of false electors, none of those are independently illegal. They're only illegal when you capture them in this frame of obstruction and you paint them as part of a conspiracy to obstruct. Then Jack Smith says this is evidence of illegal conduct. And so what the Supreme Court had to do is look and see which acts were considered presidential acts in this ball of conduct, and they should be thrown out, or which acts are considered individual acts, in which case they can be fairly indicted. And here's the thing, and here's the tough question for the court when you dig all the way into this case. The tough question was, okay, if he gets presidential immunity for it, does Jack Smith still get to say it in front of the trial court? So for instance, if it's lawful and within his presidential authority to call up Kemp and say, find me the votes, if that is considered an official act, is Jack Smith able to stand up in his opening statement and say, Donald Trump had this phone call, let's play the phone call? And the Supreme Court said, no, it's excised from the case. Now, Chutkan has to decide which one of these are official acts. The Supreme Court said some of them are official acts, we're not letting them in. They said some are presumptively official but can be rebutted. And then the Supreme Court said there are other acts that we're not making a determination on. Chutkan, you make your determination. So what's going to end up happening is somebody's going to take a big redaction marker, which Jack Smith loves to use, right, to protect the names of all the people he's conspiring with, and take a redaction marker and put it over the portions of the indictment that are official acts. And that's all he gets to talk about. And that's what they have to try a case on. Now, Sean, let me just go through the options after the November 5th election. And I think by the time this airs, hopefully there may be a deal where I end up in studio with a certain network on election day, which I'm really looking forward to. So hopefully I can get an inside scoop to see how they're handling it all. That should be pretty exciting. But when the election happens and Donald Trump is inaugurated, trial on none of these cases are going to trial between November 5th and January 6th. Okay, so let's talk about option number one. Trump wins the election. Now, there's not going to be a winner or loser on November 5th. I don't believe at all. I don't know if we're going to get a winner or loser of this election, period. I'm just saying it, Sean. I don't know that this is going to get resolved, period. I'm not so sure that we're going to have a clear inauguration on January 6th. I'm very concerned about that based on what I'm already hearing about the early voting. But let's say Trump wins the election hands down and they allow him to be inaugurated. He has the option of pardoning himself of this case. The Department of Justice has said self-pardons are not allowed. We're not going to let you do it. But he still could do it, and he might do it anyway. In which case, do they bring up the stale case if he loses later and they say you can't pardon yourself? Probably not. What he might say is, I am going to drop this investigation. Could they, if they get office again, if Jack Smith has a president who supports him later on, could he say that was obstruction of justice as a president to get rid of the investigation against you as a president? So he's probably going to hide it a little bit, and he's probably going to appoint somebody that's very friendly to him in office as the attorney general, who might appoint a special counsel lawfully.
I know who that's going to be, by the way.
Oh, I'm interested. Who's it going to be?
God forbid Ted Cruz loses his run in Texas. That is a razor close election. I think Cruz is starting to move forward a little bit, and I think he's starting to surge a little bit in the polls. Which
See him as attorney general?
I do, because I think Ted Cruz is a brilliant constitutionalist. I think he is pro-America. I think he is upholding the rule of law. He's a brilliant orator. I think he's an incredible. I've looked at a lot of his arguments and his cases. I've watched him. I've studied him very closely in his time as a senator. I think he would be an absolutely amazing attorney general if he were to lose his bid for re-election in Texas as a senator. I think that's who it would be, and I
don't know if he'd accept it, Sean, but we'll see. I mean, I could see Trey Gowdy accepting it.
Trey Gowdy.
He hasn't. I mean, he's just an absolute killer when it comes to not accepting BS. And I think he'll turn this thing inside out. I mean, maybe his role as a Fox News correspondent now may make people a bit concerned about his objectivity.
But the reason why I think Cruz would accept it, and you tell me if I'm wrong, it's just my opinion. I think that would be the first logical step to Ted Cruz potentially being a Supreme Court justice one day. And I think that's ultimately what he would love to be as a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, if he wants it, I could see him taking that. I think that he'd be at a good point right now where if he wanted that nomination, he'd probably just be already ready for the Supreme Court. I think he spent some time as Solicitor General for a while, and he's had some good arguments. So, but I don't know that Trump is going to do the let's throw this investigation in the garbage can. If I was advising him, I would say, hey, Don, let's just get somebody in there who's going to investigate the other side just as hard as you were investigated, and then come up with a report essentially saying there's just malfeasance on both sides. We feel that the January 6th committee was absolute hogwash. We feel that these charges never should have been brought. We could have brought charges against the other side, but we're deciding that it's better for the country to move on. I hope that he does something like that. And so it's not obstruction of justice to get rid of his case. Somebody else is performing the ministerial act of justice, and then we move on. That's what happens if Donald Trump gets into office. This ends pretty quickly, subject to potentially being brought back up if Democrats obtain office later and they would try to say it was obstruction to do justice to get rid of the prior election interference done by the Democrats, which is just so strange.
Yeah.
Like,
can I give you one prediction that I have?
Sure.
I do not believe the polls in this election are as close as the mainstream media networks are putting out there.
Yeah.
And the reason why I don't think they want to be candid with the American people is because they would lose their ratings. People would stop watching because you have no further clickbait.
Yeah, you want them to be close.
Yeah, it's down to the wire. It's within 1%. I'm going to give you my prediction. And I hope I'm right on this. And if I'm not, people can blow me up afterwards. But here's my prediction. Donald Trump wins the election by a landslide. It's not even close. I have spent hundreds of hours at this point, and I'm not joking. My wife will tell you, I have spent hundreds of hours looking at independent and private polls, I have looked and I have studied independent, objective news sources. I have spent a tremendous amount of time watching.
Never found one of those before. What's that? An independent, objective news source? Do they say independent,
it's called
objective?
The Wall. It's called The Wall.
Do these news sources, do they say independent and objective on them? Is they labeled with it?
No, but you know how I know that they are? Because they don't give me their political commentary. They don't give me their opinion. They give me the facts, and that's what I want.
Statisticians and whatnot.
Yeah. I want to make my own decisions, right? I don't want somebody filling my head with a bunch of crap. But anyways, everything that I have read, everything that I have viewed, everything that I have engaged in on my own time. And look, I had almost 12 days of doing absolutely nothing while I had that surgical procedure, and I spent 5 days in the hospital and another 5, 6, 7 days recovering. I had nothing to do but scream at the computer. And
give us one thing. What's one thing that tells you, like, you gave the overarching idea, but what's one thing that tells you this is going to be a landslide?
So the Black community, African American men, if you look at the numbers, the percentages right now of African Americans, but not only that, African American men that are pro-Trump, that have indicated they are voting for Trump, he has the largest percentage of Black voters of any Republican candidate in modern history. That is a huge, huge swing for him. The Hispanic vote is massive in favor of Trump. Where I live right now in Georgia, I can tell you the early turnout and the number of people that were registered Democrats who have actually changed their status to a registered Republican. We have seen 55,000 here in the state change their party affiliation during early voting from registered Democrat to registered Republican. I think Pennsylvania is going to be, it's not a swing state at this point right now. I think I think had she chosen Josh Shapiro, which would have been a brilliant choice for her, this election could have been over for the Trump-Vance administration, because I think Pennsylvania is going to be the state that has to go to one of the candidates for them to win. There's absolutely no way. There's too much damning information out there.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's jump back to January 6th, because I know
you asked me for one, but I mean, I had a head full of crap, man.
I'm pretty sure that by the time this airs, the election is going to happen very quickly, and everybody will know.
It's a landslide.
But hopefully people will still be interested in hearing what we have to say about January 6th, even after the election, because I think it's really important for them to understand what went wrong here and why it needs to be rectified. So,
but this is also our history as a country, and the way that we've learned,
I mean, it's
not
definitely
to make
part
the
of
same
our
mistakes again is by understanding our history.
Exactly, unless we decide to tear the statue down. So, early 2021, we've got multiple investigations launched by the Department of Justice. Over 1,358 individuals were charged for their actions related to the Capitol attack. Many of those charges have now been dismissed. I think 800 of them were called into question as a result of the Fisher case. March 2nd, 2022, Nancy Pelosi stands up her congressional committee and said that there was enough evidence for a good faith basis that Trump and others engaged in a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the election. Merrick Garland appointed Jack Smith as the special prosecutor in this case. And while I can't go over all of the jurisprudence regarding the appointment clause, the reality is that somebody like Jack Smith should be appointed by Congress. The only way that you can be bipartisan as a prosecutor or investigator in a case like this is if you're not appointed by somebody who already is partisan. Merrick Garland in this case is clearly partisan because he was given the position by Biden, and he will maintain the position if Biden gets reelected, and he will lose it if Donald Trump gets elected. So the idea that Jack Smith has a constitutional purpose for being involved in his position is absolutely corrupt and defunct, and arguments that try to support that just don't make any sense. Where Judge Cannon, the judge down in Florida who took care of this issue and essentially fired Jack Smith from the case, where she got it right, though, was in the funding. Congress has the power of the purse. The Department of Justice has the ability to give some of its budget over to a special prosecution, sure, but that has to be earmarked for Department of Justice initiatives. Did Congress authorize funding for this investigation, or was this an unfettered, unlimited funding investigation by Jack Smith? And where did they get the money from? And that was actually a huge concern for the judge, because obviously the financial resources being unlimited, they can go through anything they want to try to hang Trump up, right? But Congress never earmarked that funding for this type of purpose. So all in all, Judge Cannon says, Jack Smith, you had no official basis for being appointed. You got to go. Judge Chutkan did not come up with the same thing. And nobody who filed those motions in D.C. in the January 6th cases were ever able to get Jack Smith's team or those prosecutors off of the case, nor were they able to get a change of venue in those cases. So Jack Smith is unlawfully appointed, at least according to a federal judge down in Florida. That's not me talking. August 1st, Trump was indicted on 4 charges, including conspiracy to defraud. October 2023, his legal team filed motions to dismiss based on immunity and freedom of speech, citing Brandenburg and all of the immunity rules. And obviously those go up to the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court issues 2 opinions that were vital. I kept telling everybody from the beginning, keep your eyes on Fisher. That is going to be the most important case. And the reality is it is. The immunity official acts issue, I knew it was only going to be immunity for official acts, and Fisher was the case to watch. If this case gets dismissed, it will be because the obstruction of justice charge doesn't count in this manner at all. Is not how that charge was supposed to be levied. It's inappropriate. It's too broad, and we wouldn't want that used by anybody. So that's the rundown of the election, the January 6th election case brought against Donald Trump. Now let's talk about what happens if Kamala Harris gets into office. When we have this election in just a few weeks, there's a potential that Kamala Harris wins, in which case this investigation will continue. This prosecution will likely continue. And unless she feels that it would be too embarrassing having Trump's team in a full trial just rail on them, they may decide, Kamala may decide to dismiss, and she may want to look like she's, offering an olive branch and being a peaceful person, and maybe she dismisses to get some political credibility and maybe get some moderates to her side. I do believe that Trump's legal team, just like they did in the impeachment case, is ready to absolutely tear down this prosecution. There is so much evidence in Trump's favor that this never should have been brought. Even if he is convicted, he's not going anywhere. The case will go to the Supreme Court, and there will be many reasons to overturn it. This is unwinnable from a Democrat standpoint. So Kamala may say, let's just move on from this, or she may want the case to die. One thing she doesn't want is to get beat in this case. That's one thing she can't have. She either has to get rid of it or she has to win. She is now in the position of most prosecutors. If you're going to bring it and you're going to continue it, you got to win. So I recommend she gets rid of it. But she may not. People may be pissed off at that. She might lose liberals if she decides to get rid of it. So if it continues, there's going to be 2 more visits to the Supreme Court, I predict. The case will come back down. I don't think that there will be a trial for at least a year, if not more. And if there is a trial, I think it's going to be so limited and confusing that it's probably not worth having in the first place. And this isn't going to be a week-long trial. This is going to be a trial several months long. This is going to be a trial that's absolutely substantial. I don't think that the Georgia case is going to survive. That is on its last legs. It's going down. I think Jack Smith's case barely survives to make it to trial, but if it does, there will be a trial and it'll happen. I think ultimately, does Donald Trump ever get convicted with any felony other than what happened in New York? No. And does the felony case in New York stand? No.
No. Bye-bye. That goes away. Because again, the appellate court in New York is already saying, what in the world have you people done?
So that was the financial fraud case. That was the Letitia case, but I'm with you. The appellate court is already looking at this saying, what the heck? And in that case, we have Alvin Bragg standing in the shoes of a supposed federal tax statute. I've been very vocal about this on the news. In fact, I was on Scripps News a while ago, and they say they're very fair and balanced, but I was telling one of the commentators, he was grilling me. I love this guy. I can't remember his name, but he was grilling me on some of the Alvin Bragg stuff. And I kept saying, this is not an offense. This is not a crime. He has not been clear about what the crime is. Hush money is not a crime. And it was nice having a little bit of a witty back and forth, but that's the only network that has ever entertained or even heard me out on the possibility that Alvin Bragg's hush money indictment was an indictment of something that's not a crime. Sean, I'm just going to leave you with this. This is a scary day in America. Not just a day. It's a scary era in America where truth has been subjective lately, where you can engage in this postmodern analysis of old activities and reframe them under broad federal statutes as being crime. I just put an article up called Blood in the Water, and it's this concept that all prosecutors need to do is ride the wave of a press cycle of some heinous conduct and then search for victims, because they will come right to you when there's blood in the water on somebody. And then there will be a feeding frenzy around that person. And usually it starts with the aggressive use of an overly broad statute, this obstruction statute, the RICO statute. This is what's happening against Diddy. This is what's happening against the Abercrombie guy. Not to say they are good guys, but listen, our statutes need to mean things. We need to understand what criminal activity is and what it isn't. And saying, hey, if you engage in this activity, it's going to be good for your career. I'm sorry, but that is not something the federal or state government needs to get involved in criminalizing. Those are adult decisions that need to be made by adults. And hopefully, if the government decides to stop being a parent sometime soon, individuals could make a choice to oust somebody like that from their position if they find that they are being abusive with it, or maybe sue them for an employment issue, whatever it might be. But these aren't the things that should be blogging up our courts. We've got rapists, we've got murderers, we've got cold cases, we've got rape kits stacked up in Detroit that need to get thrown away that haven't been tested for years. The DC circuit is essentially at a halt, with other people rotting in jail while they wait to deal with Donald Trump's case and the January 6th cases. Look at what happened in Fulton County, Sean, where people can't get their day in court because you've got this crazy rapper trial that's going on, and you've got Donald Trump's other trial, and there are so many cases that are backed up. There are rape victims, domestic violence victims. There are pregnant mothers that have been beaten almost all the way to death, who are waiting for the day that the person who did it gets to be put on trial. And that is on hold because we've decided to turn the Department of Justice and our prosecutors' offices into tools used by politicians. There was supposed to be a demarcation line, and that was never put in place, and that is getting blurred. And everybody out there needs to absolutely put a stop to it with your vote. Politicized prosecutions, no matter how much we hate the person, they have to stop, period.
I'm with you. These political persecutions and prosecutions have to stop. If somebody has truly violated the law and there is clear and present danger to the American people, if somebody has truly done something that rises to the level of a crime, and that they could tie a conspiracy allegation into it or an indictment into it, then fine. But what we have seen, and I agree with Donald Trump on this, this has been a political witch hunt from the beginning. They have wanted to impeach Donald Trump from the minute he came down the golden escalator in Trump Plaza back in 2015. I think the montage that Mario was able to put together in the very first overview that you did on January 6th, I think it was outstanding. Because if you're somebody who doesn't follow the news cycle on a regular basis, if you're somebody who just, I come home at the end of the day and I turn on Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or whatever, and I hear this word or I hear it once or twice, whatever. But when you see a montage over a period of years and people like Elizabeth Warren, who I absolutely despise as a human being, have used the term 175 times in a matter of a day, it's hard to think that this is anything other than political persecution and a witch hunt. I agree 100%. I don't anticipate Chutkan is going to do the right thing. I would be shocked if she does. I think this thing is going to die on the vine because once Donald Trump is elected president, he's got nothing to lose with only the ability to serve one more term. So making this thing go away, whether it's quietly or publicly, I don't think he's really going to care what the court of public opinion is. And I don't know that they're going to be able to stop him from that. I agree with you. At the end of the day, this thing just needs to stop. This country needs to heal. We need to come together. We don't need more natural disasters to bring us together. We don't need another 9/11 terrorist attack on this country to bring us together. We need this partisan witch hunt to end. Trump needs to let this stuff die on the vine, leave Kamala Harris to ride off into the sunset, let Joe Biden head off to the nursing home for his daily dose of prune juice and ice cream. And let's just get back to running this country. Let's make this country the beacon on the hill that it's always been for people around the world to want to come here, to want to contribute as active members and contributing members of our society. And let's just get back to doing the business of America.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for joining us, everybody, on this second part of our January 6th episode. We're going to have a third and fourth for you as soon as we can lay it down. Looking forward to getting Ryan Zink in here, hopefully by audio, so that you can all hear his story. Next up, we're going to talk about detention and January 6th. You're going to hear stories of people who are rotting in a DC jail after being detained for essentially trespassing, nonviolent offenses. This stuff is disgusting. When you hear it, you're going to feel completely differently about January 6th and what happened. We've got that coming up. We also have a bit more an analysis on Donald Trump's impeachment hearing and some of the fabrication of evidence that happened during that hearing. All in all, hope you join us for the next 2 episodes of that preview. And of course, we've got a big election coming up. So Sean and I are looking at finding ways that we can come to you and analyze the legal implications of this election saga. I'm sure we're going to be putting out some bonus episodes as this election ultimately gets litigated, which we're predicting. We're already diving into the law on these issues. I've got a lot of cases ready so that you can all understand how these recounts are done. If you want to see some of that, you want to see the rest of the election episodes, just go ahead and click subscribe and make sure you join us on some future episodes. Thanks for having us, and thanks for being part of the wall.
See you soon.
See you.